Some confessions weigh on your chest so heavily that every unspoken word starts to feel like a mountain, and the more time passes, the heavier it becomes. For years, I've kept this weight buried inside me, unsure of how to let it out. But today is different. Today, I finally have to speak, because this feeling, this suffocation, has been changing me in ways I never thought possible. I'm 60 now. And it's not easy to admit, but something happened to me recently that made me feel more alive than I ever have in my life. I never expected it to happen, especially not under such mundane circumstances. But somehow, this one moment, this chance encounter, changed everything. It all began that morning. As usual, I woke up to the sound of the shower running cold. The hot water had stopped working again. It wasn't the first time. It had been weeks since I last had a properly functioning faucet. Every repair seemed to bring a new set of problems. The taps were always getting stuck, the pipes always leaking, and each time I had to call someone to come fix it. Ever since my husband passed away, I didn't have anyone to handle these things. The house was too quiet. The walls too still. Everything in my life had become a slow, repetitive cycle of loneliness and routine. That morning was no different, except for one small thing. I called the plumber from the local listings, like I usually did, never expecting much more than a quick fix and a silent goodbye. But this time, the voice on the other end was different. "Hello, this is Maxwell," the voice said, calm but deep, almost reassuring. "I can be there today." There was something about that voice, something steady, confident. It caught my attention more than it should have. It made me pause for a second, as if there was more to this interaction than just a broken faucet. I told myself it was nothing, but deep down, I couldn't shake the curiosity that was stirring inside me. When Maxwell arrived, everything shifted. I had expected the usual plumber, someone just there to do their job and leave, but when I opened the door, I wasn't prepared for the energy that rushed in with him. Maxwell stood at the threshold, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. He had a kind of vitality that immediately washed over me, like a breath of fresh air in a room that had been still for too long. He didn't waste time. Dropping his toolbox to the floor with a practiced motion, he nodded toward the hallway. "Is the bathroom this way?" I didn't know why, but I hesitated before leading him down the narrow corridor to the bathroom. There was something in the way he moved, something assured about him that made me feel uncomfortable in a way I hadn't felt in years. I stepped aside to let him pass, and for just a moment I caught myself staring at him, noticing the way his muscles flexed under his simple work shirt. I hadn't seen a body like that in a long time. Not since my husband. The thought made me flush, and I quickly forced my gaze away. "This the one?" Maxwell asked, his voice steady and professional as he crouched down to examine the faucet. "Yes," I replied, my voice a little shaky, betraying the nerves I hadn't expected. It wasn't just the faucet I was nervous about, I realized. It was everything about this moment, about the way he seemed to fill the space, about the way my pulse quickened without explanation. He worked silently for a few minutes, inspecting the pipes under the sink, his hands moving with precision. I couldn't help but notice the way his movements were so assured, so confident. There was an intensity to him, an energy that made everything feel different. I wanted to keep my distance, remind myself that this was nothing more than a routine job. But somehow, I couldn't help but keep stealing glances at him. "Old system," Maxwell said after a while, standing up and brushing his hands off. "But I can fix it. It'll take a few hours, though." His calm confidence was grounding, and for a moment I felt myself settle a little, though a strange fluttering in my chest wouldn't subside. It had been so long since I'd spoken with someone like him, someone so young, so full of energy. The weight of the silence between us started to feel heavier, though, like there was something unsaid hanging in the air. I tried to fill the quiet with conversation. "Not many young plumbers, are there?" Maxwell glanced up from his work and gave me a quick smile. "I've been doing this for 5 years," he said, focusing back on the pipes. "Started as an apprentice, then went off on my own." I noticed the way he spoke, his tone steady and grounded. He wasn't bragging, just stating the facts, but somehow I couldn't stop myself from feeling impressed. It had been a long time since I'd been so intrigued by someone, so drawn in by their presence. 26, he added without hesitation when I asked his age. "You probably didn't expect that, huh?" I was surprised, but I didn't let it show. "No, I didn't," I said, giving him a small smile. "You look older, more mature." Maxwell didn't respond right away, his face shifting slightly, as though my comment had caught him off guard. But after a moment, he returned to his work, his focus unwavering. I could tell he was trying to maintain the professionalism of the situation, even though there was a tension that hadn't been there before. I cleared my throat, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, if you want, I have some coffee brewing. People say it's the best in town." Maxwell hesitated, glancing at me for a moment. "Thanks, but I've got other jobs lined up today." I couldn't help the slight pang of disappointment that followed. I'd hoped for just a little more time with him to see where this odd connection was going. But Maxwell didn't seem interested in anything beyond his work. Still, something about him intrigued me. He was focused, professional, and young. But there was a part of me that wondered if there was more to him than just the man fixing my faucet. When the repair was done, Maxwell packed up his tools with efficiency. I was grateful for his quick work, but there was still something lingering in the air. I walked him to the door, trying to find the right words. "Thanks again, Maxwell. You're really good at what you do." He nodded, his eyes meeting mine one last time. There was something in that glance, something that made me feel like we both knew there was more to this interaction than either of us was saying. Without another word, he turned and left. As I closed the door behind him, I realized my heart was beating faster than it had in years. I couldn't stop wondering what had just happened. Was it just a repair job? Or had that young man entered my life to shake something loose that I had long forgotten? The next few days were a blur of everyday life, quiet, routine, predictable. I tried to push the memory of Maxwell out of my head as though he had never even been in my home. But it was hard, so hard. Every time I stepped into the kitchen or passed by the bathroom, I couldn't help but think about his smile, the way his voice had resonated with a warmth I hadn't heard in a long time. Even his presence in my home, simple as it had been, had somehow filled the empty corners I'd grown so used to. I told myself it was nothing. He was just a plumber after all, and I was old enough to know that sometimes simple interactions were just that, nothing more. Still, I couldn't help but think about him at odd moments, about how he had looked at me with that quiet understanding. It wasn't the look of a man who was just doing his job. It was the kind of look that made me feel seen. I couldn't explain it, and that only made the feeling more unsettling. Then, just as I had finally convinced myself that it was all in my head, I saw him again. It was early in the afternoon, and I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping my coffee. The morning sunlight spilled through the windows, casting a soft glow over the room. Everything felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. That's when I heard the knock at the door. It was so sudden, so unexpected that my heart skipped a beat. I hadn't been expecting anyone. Maybe it was the delivery I'd ordered, or maybe it was a neighbour. But when I opened the door, my breath caught in my throat. There he was, Maxwell, standing on my doorstep, wearing a slight grin and holding a small package in his hands. "Maxwell," I said, taken aback, "what are you doing here?" "I brought the part you ordered for your faucet," he said, his tone light, almost teasing. "Figured I'd drop it off in person since I was in the neighbourhood." I looked at him, unsure of how to respond. The last time I'd seen him, I hadn't expected anything more than a quick repair and a polite farewell. Yet, here he was, showing up unannounced with a kind of familiarity that felt out of place. But there was something else in his eyes, something unspoken that made my heart race. "You didn't have to come all this way," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I could have picked it up myself. He shrugged, a nonchalant expression on his face. "It's no trouble. I like to make sure everything's working properly. Besides," he added with a wink, "I wasn't going to let you suffer through another cold shower." I chuckled, but the sound was weak, strained. "Well, that's very kind of you." We stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between us. The weight of his presence felt different this time. He wasn't just a professional plumber now. He was something else, something I couldn't quite define. It made me feel awkward and out of place, like I was caught in a dream I wasn't ready to wake up from. "I don't suppose you'd like to come in for a coffee?" I asked before I could stop myself. Maxwell hesitated, and for a moment I thought he would decline. But then, to my surprise, he stepped inside without a word. The air between us shifted, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. It was as though the world outside had disappeared, leaving just the two of us standing there in the quiet hum of my home. He set the package down on the counter and turned to face me. "I have a little time," he said. "Why not?" I led him to the kitchen where I had just brewed a fresh pot. As I poured the coffee, I couldn't help but feel nervous. I hadn't had a man in my house like this in years. And this man, this stranger who had come to fix my faucet, seemed to have a way of filling the space in ways I wasn't used to. We sat down at the kitchen table, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was different. No, it wasn't the quiet I was used to, the kind that felt comfortable and safe. It was thick, almost like there was something hanging in the air that neither of us could quite grasp. "So, how's work?" I asked, trying to break the silence. Maxwell leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, and smiled. "Same as usual. A few odd jobs here and there. But you know," he said with a shrug, "it's nice to get a break from it all every once in a while." I nodded, trying to ignore the sudden warmth spreading through me. There was something about the way he spoke, the way his eyes met mine, with a kind of quiet confidence, that made me feel both at ease and on edge at the same time. It was a strange, uncomfortable sensation I hadn't experienced in years. "I can't remember the last time I had a visitor," I said, almost absently. "It's been so long. Since my husband passed, the house has just felt empty." Maxwell's expression softened, and he leaned forward slightly. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said quietly. "It must have been hard for you." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It's strange, you know, how quickly life changes. One moment you have everything, and the next it's all gone." There was a pause before Maxwell spoke again, his voice lower now, more thoughtful. "I can't imagine what that must have been like for you." For a moment I met his gaze, and something shifted between Yuzen unspoken understanding. Maybe it was the way he spoke, or maybe it was just the quiet, gentle way he listened. Whatever it was, I felt a connection with him that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't romantic, not exactly. But there was something there, something that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. As the afternoon wore on, we continued to talk about work, about life, about nothing in particular. It wasn't long before the coffee was finished and Maxwell stood up to leave. But before he did, he paused by the door and turned to face me. "Thanks for the coffee," he said, giving me a small smile. "It was nice to talk." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and something else, something deeper, something I wasn't quite ready to admit. "I'm glad you stopped by," I said softly. Maxwell lingered for a moment, his eyes locking with mine once more. Then, without another word, he turned and left. I closed the door behind him, feeling the weight of the silence press in on me once again. But this time, it wasn't the same. The house still felt empty, but now it was filled with the memory of Maxwell's visit, with the lingering warmth of his presence. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel so alone.